lecture by Dr. Temple Smith entitled Higher Learning, Poverty, Access, and Education. Dr. Temple Smith is an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology and Social Work at Hope College. She's passionate about young adults and the developmental transition from adolescence to adulthood is evidenced by her many academic research and service projects. Her current research explores college-age populations and the impact of childhood poverty on aspirations, opportunity construction, and academic performance. Addressing systemic educational inequities is a fundamental premise of her work. Dr. Smith is dedicated to advancing retention capacity among college students who strive to overcome vulnerable circumstances due to systemic disadvantage. And she loves, finally, to engage undergraduate students in mentoring and support relationships. Friends, it's so good to have you here. I think all of us have been touched in different ways, academically, personally, as a teacher, professor, as a colleague by Dr. Smith. I'm so delighted to have her with us today, giving one of our continuing scholars lectures. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Smith.
Good morning, early afternoon, sort of. How's everybody?
Good.
Oh, that's good. So thank you for joining me, my department, my colleagues, my friends, and students. I'm elated to share with you my research agenda, how my Christian faith has shaped that agenda, and my identity as a Christian scholar. But before I begin, can you please allow me to acknowledge some special people who are joining us today, scholars in my life. I want to acknowledge Dr. Renee Kennedy, CEO of the Michigan Public Health Institute, joining us today. Thank you so much. Linda Jacobs, Executive Director of Good Samaritan Ministries, and my personal soul sister, as she calls herself. I agree with that. My pastor, John Brown Pillar Church, and my first college mentor and her husband, Valerie and Jerry Nielsen. Can you believe it's been 20 years? Oh my God, our relationship has been a testament to the impact of collegiate mentorship models and the power of unwavering compassion. I'm so happy you're here today, both of you. I would also like to extend my appreciation and gratitude to both Jonathan Haygood and Andy McCoy, who run a world-class summer program for faculty exploring their Christian faith and vocation. Your commitment has been exceptional, and you have been great examples to me. And you're fun too. You're really fun to be around. Getting people up at 8 o'clock in the morning on summers is not easy. Okay, so I'd like to introduce myself. I know some of you, but I don't know all of you. I would like to begin a little bit by sharing about myself and my background. So, I was a young girl growing up on the east side of Detroit. Not the suburbs, the inner city Detroit, you know, the chocolate city with the vanilla suburbs, Detroit, as it was called. I will share with you later some statistics about my neighborhood. I went to college, which in and of itself is remarkable. I went to graduate school, which was unheard of for people coming from my neighborhood. I've been visiting Holland as a graduate student. I had a girl in my cohort, her in-laws were from Holland. We took study vacations here. How nerdy can you be? Right? We went to the Tool Festival, totally did Holland, and we took our study vacations in Holland. I was a Christian in an academic world where my faith was an obstacle to my full participation. I was longing for a place where my academics and faith could hold hands. Now, I heard about this place called Hope that described itself as a small liberal arts college in the context of the historic Christian faith. This was a dream I could hardly fathom, but at the same time, it was exactly what I wanted and where I wanted to be. I was not swayed by the stern advice of my committee that cautions me to cast a wider net. Coming from an R1 institution, you sure you want to do that? At the same time, I was in a season of vocational discernment. I was teaching at MSU, and I was working full-time in my church as the youth director. Program, 300 youth. I was discerning at this time whether to go into ministry full-time or to go into the academy. I was on the fence when an email hit my inbox. This was the subject. To this day, I have no idea where this email came from. Some listserv that I didn't subscribe to as my time was really stretched. The subject said, tenure track position, sociology, Hope College. I had 19 heart attacks. I thought it is possible. It's possible. It's possible. And it can be the case that my academic career could be situated in the context of my faith. I'm sharing all of this to let you know how grateful I am for this place and to be a part of it. I want to share some of my hope for who we can be, informed by the research I do. Okay, so here's a prevailing system. This is a growing, prevailing mantra that posits college is not for everyone. In the face of soaring tuition, poor secondary preparation, and burdens of student loan debt, some politicians, administrators, academics, and other public figures have said maybe college isn't for everybody. This statement is provocative in nature because for some, college may be one of the few pathways out of cyclic poverty and other threatening social factors throughout the life course. If college isn't for everyone, are we implicitly stating that it is for some and not others? Provocative is somewhat divisive also. So, in this talk, I want to discuss my current research agenda that explores the necessity of a college education for economically disadvantaged young adults and how my Christian faith informs my research. Okay, so to do this, see how the professor kicks in, I need to kind of game plan. Okay, so I'm going to begin with a demographic overview, really briefly, very simply, about the overview of households living in poverty. I'm going to discuss my current research agenda, which explores how college attendance mediates the relationship between poverty and other social determinants that I have termed the Big Five that instigate poor life quality. Lastly, I'm going to talk about how my Christian faith influences this agenda and my identity as a Christian scholar. Okay. So let's look at some numbers here. According to the 2015 census, 14.7% of the U.S. population lives below the poverty line. 21% of those households are with children under 18. And for African American families, 22.9% live in poverty. That number increases to 32% if you look at households with children under 18. The national average is 18%. For poor youth from compromised neighborhoods and sometimes fractured families, college offers a vital solution to the injurious consequences of poverty, intervening at a pivotal age developmentally. So, for these vulnerable youth, college addresses what I have termed the big five. College, in my mind, is one of the only institutions I know of that, with one acceptance, simultaneously changes somebody's life in all of these areas at once. When they're about 17 to 18, when they're at the precipice of a transition into young adulthood, if you have these sorts of factors, you have a compromised family, a corrupt neighborhood, a failing post-secondary education system, and all of these things are happening simultaneously, college mediates those things. So the first thing, it changes your zip code. That's rule number one. One acceptance and you live somewhere else. Two, it gives you a social network. Proof of my social network is here on some levels. Gives you some responsible adults, aspiring youth, different peer groups. It gives you a radically different network. Three, your diet. Many youth are in neighborhoods that are food deserts. Or as you know, food, good food, whole food, the slow food movement is not free or cheap. So the food that you could eat could also be a byproduct of that neighborhood. College changes that. How miraculous is this? There is a staff of people and their full-time job is to decide how you're going to eat. I was just in shock about this. Safety. Colleges aren't perfect. But by and large, they strive to create safe environments for you. There's visible jogging. There's public safety. There are these aspects of a controlled environment that are relatively safe. And last, feelings of personal control. Feeling that you can infringe directly on the events that happen in your life. Not only superfuel agency, but also optimism. You have to think that something else is possible, and if all of these things are compromised, it's very hard to remain optimistic and to have agency and to make forward momentum towards changing your life in the absence of resources that you need. So college can position you for more favorable life chances. A prominent theory in sociology by a brilliant theorist, Marx Weber, says that life chances is the sentiment that the opportunities each individual has to improve the quality of their life, these things being accessible, will change their life. So the opportunities that a person has. Now, you've heard this colloquially expressed when parents say, I want to give my child a fair shot at life. They're encapsulating the gist of this theory, life chances. So it's the opportunities each individual has to improve their life. Opportunities, and to this extent, are both tangible ones and intangible ones. So food, clothing, shelter. Intangible ones, education, health care, right? How do you change these things in the absence of resources you need? Life chances comprise the individual's ability to procure goods, have a career, obtain inner satisfaction. In other words, the ability to satisfy one's needs. We might also articulate this as the optimal conditions necessary for human flourishing, right? There's a word that some might resonate with. Right? It's a predictive concept. It describes how likely, given certain factors, that an individual's life will turn out in a certain way. According to this theory, life chances are positively correlated with socioeconomic status. So it shouldn't be the case that you can give me someone's zip code, give me someone's income, give me someone's educational attainment level, and with some accuracy I can predict mortality rates, I can predict comorbid symptoms, I can predict things that I shouldn't be right about, but are the consequence of poverty and persistent poverty. So college then is one vehicle I suggest for disadvantaged youth that can drastically improve life chances, promote flourishing, and simultaneously address those big five that I mentioned. So my current research agenda uses data from the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health, also called briefly ADHealth. And so this data was collected in its beginning, wave 1, in 1994. And they follow a cohort of students that are beginning college, graduating from high school, all the way into the early 30s. This data comes from U of M with North Carolina. And I've been looking at this data to examine the impact of the Big Five, to examine how do disadvantaged youth construct opportunities. What does agency look like? And I've been using this data to inform attrition and persistence models, gearing towards retention and ultimately graduation. So, as you might have guessed, I have a personal connection to my research. I was a young adult that desperately needed these mediating factors that I've termed the Big Five that college attendance affords. I grew up in the inner city of Detroit, plagued by issues of poverty and compromised neighborhoods. By the 12th grade, by my senior year of high school, I knew more people going to jail than I did going to college. In fact, I knew very few that had actually weathered the application process successfully and were actually college bound, not the articulated aspiration, but acceptance letter in hand. So I wanted to show you some of these things. Using Geographic Information Systems data, I looked at the years 2012 to 2016, and I was looking at Detroit, and I was looking at East Lansing, and just looking at a few of these factors. So here are families in poverty. So when we get to this green, that's a little before the darkest one, that represents 30 to 40% of families, and above that, 20 to 30%. I actually put in my home address from when I lived in Detroit. 7546 Clarkwood. Right here. Block by block, aggregating to the tract level, this is the pin drop of my house. If you look around and you look at the neighboring areas, what you see here is 20 to 40% of the families live in poverty. East Lansing is where I went to school. This pin drop was my dorm. And what you see here is 2 to 10% of the families live in poverty. So when we're talking about resources you have by way of an intact neighborhood or who you're going to meet, geographical location matters. Here it is, adults recording very good or excellent health. Let's think about this. This may give us some indicators around food consumption, exercise, or other patterns that might yield good health. So let's look at this. Here it again. This is the pin drop of my neighborhood. 40 to 50% of adults here are saying that, they would report that I have okay, decent health. And then when you get here, look at how much of the surrounding area as a whole, not just pockets of places, it's pretty homogeneous here. Mind you, this is the east side, and it's just about 13 blocks that we're looking at, right? Until we get further to other parts of the city. But this right here is East Lansing. 65% or more reporting very good health. How many have attained a bachelor's degree? Here it is again. At the height of it, 12%, just about 13%. Here, almost 40% or more. I find the numbers pretty staggering. I attended a talk by my esteemed colleague, Laura Pardo, and she does research on risk factors for adolescents that land them into alternative high schools. She mentioned 12 risk factors. I had a vast majority of those risk factors. Out of 12, I think I had 10. As I listened to her presentation, I was thinking about the correlates on that list and how my life had been different. When I was a graduate student, I was curious about why students like myself didn't make it, how they made it to college, or sometimes when they made it, why they didn't last. My interest in attrition had been piqued. So attrition speaks of the process of being gradually worn down. I don't want to assume a common lexicon, so excuse me if I offend your brilliance. I want to make sure. Attrition, gradually being worn down. Persistence, the ability to go from one semester to the next semester. Retention, being retained by the same institution. Graduation, finishing, completion, full matriculation, right? I was most interested in attrition because I argued that some of these things were culturally specific stressors, and that the process for one student being worn down might look completely different, and that some students had a multitude of factors wearing them down. In other words, it could be articulated by the cumulative disadvantage strain theory. I came to college worn down. That's not everybody's starting point. So I'm really interested in this, and my current research agenda explores that. So Laura's talk reminded me of what initially sparked my interest as a young graduate student regarding my research agenda today. So to this point, you might be wondering, how does this directly intersect with your Christian faith? Well, here's the point. Faith and prayer, many of you know, there are lots of scholars in the room, have been empirically evidenced to promote optimism over one's future. I did experience these benefits at the micro level. So my faith helped me, plainly. Right? On a personal level, I experienced those benefits. Additionally, the invaluable truth of the Word of God bolstered my ability to reconcile the facts of my life against the truth of God's Word. So the facts of my life were, you have a pretty bad neighborhood. The facts of your life were, not a lot of people make it out. The truth of God's Word was, I have a great plan for your life. Plans to give you hope and a future. If you call to me, I will answer you. Hebrews 11:6, I'm a rewarder of the diligent. I remember I would have this scribbled inside my notebook. And I looked up diligent because I was serious about claiming these rewards. Remember, like that's what you said. You didn't mean it, like I'm gonna take you up on this. So I was really serious about what diligent was. Diligent means to pursue in spite of obstacles. Now there's a scripture I can relate to. I felt like I've done a lot of that, so I would do a reward. These were the facts, but then there was the truth. To put plainly, I had the facts of my life, and I was weighing them against the truth of God's word, and a plausibility structure had been offered by way of the gospel, that an alternative was possible. The truth of God's word, my belief in that word, because of who he is, produced hope. I would go to church sometimes, and my pastor would say to me, because everybody knew I kind of had a crush on hope. And he would say, Sister Temple, what is hope? And I would say, hope is the optimism for something not attained. He liked that definition. I hid that definition quietly in my heart. Now, some call this resilience. Others call this agency. And me, faith in an unfailing God. At the macro level, faith informs my research agenda and ideas about Christian stewardship. Now, I've heard that Christian stewardship can be defined as the Christian use and responsibility of your time, your talent, and your treasures. What we have at Hope is remarkable. What would it be like if we were a bit more intentional with our student body's most vulnerable? Has the context of the historic Christian faith come to mean a set of things we believe but fail to pursue as a functional reality? A series of creeds and confessions that wants to move to an embodied reality into the arena of action. If we want to employ our faith to social justice issues, we need to know what to act on socially. That's where my research comes in. That's the advantage of sociology. My research is grounded in factors that mediate the relationship between disadvantage, poverty, and education. Sociology is powerful because it shows us what is happening and how to respond. As a Christian, I'm shaped by God's response to the world and to the poor. So I was a young girl growing up on the east side of Detroit in the inner city that had been given the facts of life, but carried a hope. So thank you for the privilege of your attention, and I welcome any comments and questions you have.
Friends, as Dr. Smith said, questions should be willing to take.
Yes.
Hello. So I have about 27 questions. I'm going to just try to pick one.
You got 27 minutes. Go on.
No, that was an amazing presentation. I'm full of notes. So one of the things that I was thinking about was one of your earlier statements about this belief, college isn't for everyone. It means that it is, however, for someone, and who is that someone in kind of our social consensus. I think that's a very indicting statement. But I also work with a lot of families that are in a lower income situation that are very concerned about the debt, about a potential income earner leaving a household, all those kinds of things. So for a family that has those concerns and wanting to kind of bridge that in terms of practical applications, what have you seen in maybe your interactions, your work with your church, things like that, that you feel like we can carry out into the community?
Oh, that's a good question. So there are two things. Income and education are inextricably linked. So without going to college, you stand to be less competitive in the labor market, thus possibly entrapping a family into a poverty cycle. So the first thing is I'm hearing, is college worth the investment? From a labor market perspective, it's essential. So to a family thinking about, do I borrow or the exorbitant amount of college, I would say college is an investment that has a greater return on investment than not going if you have these sets of factors. This is your family construction. This is your neighborhood. With some predictive accuracy, I can give a less promising scenario of what would happen if a young person stayed. If a young person left, those resources, those skills, those earnings, those experiences go back to fortify that family actually. So I promote that, and I understand that's a provocative set of statements, but I did my dissertation on low-income, high-achieving students who had taken credit card debt out to handle college. Treated credit cards like parents. Here's the truth of the matter. Commercial debt is different. Visa is not Great Lakes or Sally Mae. They will not reason with you, and they have assured collection practices. It is stratified and housed differently on your credit report. It differentially impacts your debt to income ratio. You can negotiate these things with college debt. You can arrange it, defer it, forbear it, change it, switch lenders. You can do lots of things to pay a long-term debt. You may not do any of that commercially. And what's worse, for families who stay in those communities, they fall prey to predatory lending. Because the sad truth is, we have some members in our society that financially are prey.
I'm kind of concerned about the Big Five and how it would impact a certain group that is pretty important. President Obama, in his first 2 years in particular, talked a lot about the value and need to strengthen and support our community college system. And I think about the five, and you don't necessarily get all five with a community college. I've taught a little bit at community college, and I like it, but it's a different experience somewhat. How does that kind of fit in?
Oh, I love this comment, this last question. We hear this a lot, right? Go to community college first. The persistence levels do not suggest that that works out well, number one. Two, it misses a crucial point of social contact that makes persistence necessary. So basically, if you start off at a community college and you transfer in, friendships have been formed, social experiences have been gained, and you weaken your ability for social support by way of peers, especially in this technologically mediated, super close, like it take 5 pictures society. You miss one semester, it's like you missed an eternity. And it's very hard for students to get adjusted after that. So we don't really talk about that. The second thing is, when you're in a community college, the classroom is very diverse. You could have someone 40, you could have someone 18, you can have someone who is already a professional. You don't get the full array of social experiences that are filtered by traditional college age. And quite frankly, sometimes that's problematic. You're mixing essentially some minors with adults a lot. And so I would suggest, I like the dual enrollment model. That's the model that I like. If you're trying to cut costs and saying going to community college, I don't want you to miss this. I think community colleges are great, and they're becoming an increasingly important vehicle in the education landscape. I would say dual enrollment. That will equally cut the cost. You'll transfer in with more credits, but you'll be the same age, and you'll get the benefit of your peers.
So taking that question one more step, have you ever thought about mapping your Big Five onto, say, 5 different types of colleges and universities? Community college, liberal arts college, regional university, R1 university, for-profit college? Would that make a difference in the Big Five?
I think that's a brilliant idea. To date, I've looked at only 4-year private colleges. I'm biased right now, but I'm also testing the waters. I think this is something that I would like to do in the future because I think they look different. It's not that they're not there, they just look different. I have no idea how the Big Five look at a community college because I don't know many that are deeply residential. They have huge commuter populations. So, and that's one of the downfalls. You need to leave your home, whether your home is, you need to leave. So I guess I would like to see, I think community colleges are changing in that way too. So I think it will be interesting to see in a couple of years the way the community colleges look and the way that they're responding to this, especially by way of dual enrollment or reverse credits.
Do the data in that adolescent longitudinal survey speak to the Big Five?
Yes.
To each one of them?
Yes, there are a series of questions that you can construct a scale around to further analyze them. So diet is one of them, and they ask a host of questions around fruit and vegetable consumption, body mass index, health behavior, sickness, illness, and so forth. And so you could get some idea of what they're eating, how regularly they're eating, and so forth. So that's one area. And the others are like that as well, where you can create a scale and then run a regression and see what do the data tell you about these things. And so I'm halfway there with looking at all of them. Gloria here. Okay.
Temple, I really appreciate the presentation, and part of my growing experiences, I experienced some of this, but fortunately, I come from a family who really believed in making sacrifices for education because we knew that was the way out, right? But I think, so I agree with all that, how transformative college is for a disadvantaged youth, and it is necessary to make that available. But I think, that argument, college is not for everyone, if we look at it from the other perspective, sometimes I also feel discouraged now on this other end to find that college has become more and more remedial, and how do we address that? So, because maybe the nature of a college education is changing, there are just more and more remedial efforts that's required to help to get a student to succeed. And wouldn't that need to be addressed at the secondary level as well, so that people come to college, that this is indeed the way to upward mobility? But and I still remember how hard it was when my first year at college. I knew I came disadvantaged because my high school, a third of the students dropped out, and we didn't get the same kind of preparation. So that's true, but there comes to a point when it becomes more and more remedial. College is no longer college. Then what do we do?
Gloria, that's a loaded question. We can hang out and have 3 more talks on that. One of the things I would say is that we've known for a long time that secondary institutions aren't equitable.
Right.
And what I've seen, as opposed to making a remedial curriculum, I've seen the response from colleges attempting to intervene earlier. So TRIO programs will be an example of this, right? Upward Bound, Talent Search, McNear Strap, right? We'll start to acclimate them sooner, faster, while they're yet in high school, so that they can adjust to college, right? So that's one way. What host of intervening programs already exist that are federally funded that advantage youth in the ways that you and I are familiar with? The other thing is mentorship models. I'm just gonna pick on Val for a moment. I walked into her office, a very thin kid from Detroit, scared. I didn't know anybody at East Lansing. I filled out a questionnaire because I had been admitted with contingency because of the income and the number of people in my household. So there was one grandmother and 6 kids. I had really good test scores, but the income made me vulnerable, so they put you, sort of flag your application as contingent. Low persistence models for students from this income bracket. So you filled out this survey to meet with a faculty member, an administrator, for 1 semester. 1 semester. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. When the semester was over, it was great. I asked her, can we meet again? And 20 years later, I still call Val. I'm still bringing her list. I like peer-to-peer mentor programs. I do. But I also think there is something very necessary for vulnerable youth to meet with an adult. Kids have bad ideas sometimes. Like, not the thing to do. You need to be meeting and interfacing somehow with a responsible adult. And I think some small schools try to do that by way of advising. But it's great when you have a set person about all things that you can adequately have access to. And for me, that was a mediating factor. So what are the programs we have? What kind of mentor modelships do we have? And do we have a clear profile on who the vulnerable are? How many? Who are they? Where are they from? How neat is this in our ability to analyze this and respond?
Did you have another question?
Yeah, I have 26 left, but I didn't want to like.
We probably won't get to them all.
No. Was there someone over there?
Okay. Oh.
No, the one of the things I was thinking about when you were showing those maps about kind of the clustering of different variables, right, within communities. When we're thinking about building more housing, right, here in Holland Zealand, here in Ottawa County, we need to meet this housing need, and we're thinking about intentional mixed income neighborhoods and communities and trying to help people live together. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how changing that segregation of poverty, that segregation of risk factors could impact students' readiness or willingness to perhaps pursue college.
So to simply state the question, how might mixed income neighborhoods incidentally impact a disadvantaged youth's college preparedness?
Preparedness, or even, like you were saying, that sense of optimism and willingness to believe that there are other options for them.
And one of the most grounded ways I would say that gosh, here's the thing. Mixed income neighborhoods for you, what they do, oh, look at that. What they do is they offer an example in the form of a person that you have repeated exposure to examine a set of behaviors, values, beliefs that you might not normally see. How can I make this very plain and grounded? For example, I think I told you I was raised by my grandmother. Our income was not a mixed income neighborhood, but in East Lansing, many neighborhoods residentially were. And I saw different things growing up that helped me to mirror or mimic behaviors that ended up giving me tools by implicit contact. I never knew some of these people, but the act of what they talked about, skills that you learned from watching them, that's probably one of the biggest examples that you have an example. You have someone else to look, consider, think, ask, consult. Okay? Especially if you're a child. Lots of people will help an aspiring child. That's why I think that window must be addressed quickly, because that sort of compassion, relentless help, social support, it has an expiration date, unfortunately. People are less likely to help an adult versus a kid. When I was young, I found if I had the tenacity to ask, many people helped or figured it out for me. It was my first form of seeing how people really exploit referrals. How does that work? How are they asking the questions? What made them pursue it this way? I was watching those things, but I had someone to watch. So that's just the bottom line. It creates a less homogeneous set of skills for you to observe. And I like that model. I understand its resistance, why people don't, particularly, it's not a popular idea in mixed income neighborhoods. But I think for families with children, it's really important.
So Temple, you talked about the big five, and toward the end you talked about faith and hope as a kind of a creedal reality. Is there a hidden proposal that I hope we ought to have faith as sort of a sixth? The students ought to be experiencing the big six at hope? I'm just kind of wondering what your ideas are about making the faith more sort of influential, more formative here.
Biblical literacy. We're a Christian college, so it shouldn't be the case. On a simple level, I feel like sometimes I can walk into a classroom and tell all the kids to open your Bible and turn to 2nd Job, and they do it. Where am I going with biblical literacy by way of application? When I was a youth director, I would have this happen to me a lot. Kids would be like, I tried it and it didn't work. I said, well, what happened? I got suspended because, I got into a fight, but I went in the bathroom and I prayed first and I was angry. Hey, what you pray? I prayed John 3:16. What? You were angry. Yes, it's true. He does love us and he gave his life, but why didn't you rehearse some things by way of anger and apply them there and get the wisdom of the word to help modify your behavior to get a different outcome? Oh, you don't know the word. Quickly changed how we were delivering the curriculum in my church. True story. And now what happens? If I tell you anger rests in the bosom of fools, a gentle answer turns away wrath. Did you try any of this? Did you consider any of this in your behavior? So, there's biblical literacy in that you should be exposed to some big picture stories, concept books of the Bible, and then you should also have some tactile way to apply this. That you're not just a hearer, but a doer.
Maybe one last question.
Have you seen any correlation between students and what we can do with faith, with this background and their success in
This is in the margins of my notebook. You been in my office? I'm interested in that, anecdotally because of my experiences, but I wonder how phenomenological is it specifically for young people. And so it's something it's a passion project that I hope to put to the test instead of theories around faith and optimism and prayer. But see, does that change persistence? I read this study that said, does adversity hone purpose and growth? That was the name of the study. And what they were looking at is the sentiment that what doesn't kill you make you stronger. And they said that really the mediating factor for the people, because sometimes it just kills you. That's just not true. What they found out was that faith mattered. The intervention of prayer allowed people to weather adversity better. And the network of a church. So church is another place where there are many different types of people that increase your capacity, network, help, social support. So those who engaged in prayer and attended a religious service regularly tended to have a brighter outlook on life.
Well, friends, I don't know about you, but can this lady answer questions?
Yeah.